Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Congressional App Challenge Debugged podcast. I'm your host, Medha, and today we have a very special episode planned out because it's about the intersection between technology and hard sciences, and my team member, Suhaani, will be leading this discussion. Suhaani, I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you, Medha. Welcome back to the alumni panel, and today we have two very special guests, Antonia and Hamza. Antonia, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself first?
Yes, hello. My name is Antonia Kolb. I just graduated high school and I'm an incoming freshman at Harvard, and I plan to study in either environmental science and engineering or statistics. And I'm an alumni of the Congressional App Challenge and won for my district in Connecticut in 2022.
Hi, my name is Hamza Wadiwala, and I'm from Houston, Texas. I participated in the Congressional App Challenge this year for 2023 or 2024, and I'm planning to be a freshman at MIT in the fall, and I'm going to study electrical engineering and computing with a minor in finance.
Awesome. So since you guys both already briefly touched on this, could you just describe what you want to do with your major and what drew you to that field of study? And Hamza, you can go first with this one.
Yeah, so I've always been interested in tech and computer science. I've taken a bunch of CS classes, but I've never been someone to just like only sit behind a computer, which is what the Congressional App Challenge is about. It's about like programming an app or something. I've never been someone to just completely do something on the software side. I've always had a more hands-on approach with my learning and with everything I like to do, and I want to see applications of what I develop. So electrical engineering and computer science lets me do a mixture of both. And I've had a passion for business and finance, so I just want to minor in it and learn as much as I can.
And Antonia, what about you?
For me, I would say I'm interested in environmental science and engineering. And so even though my Congressional App Challenge submission was completely different from that, I've always had a passion for energy science and finding ways to solve, one of the pressing problems, climate change. And for the last 2 years, I worked at Yale University's WHO Lab, which is an energy science lab. And so I conducted a lot of research on photocatalysis and basically using energy and capturing methane and converting it into viable sources of fuel. And so I would say that has had a pivotal role in why I want to study it. But I also love data science and statistics, which is why I'm still unsure of my path for college.
I think you talked about this a little when you talked about doing research at a lab. So could you talk about like that project or the research that you did a little bit more in depth about what the focus was and stuff like that?
Yeah, so like I said, I was a research intern, and so I basically worked on scalable applications of photocatalysis, basically utilizing sources of energy to cause a reaction. And so one of the applications of this was actually to solve environmental issues such as fugitive methane capture and methane emissions. And I also, during my time there, I developed a nanoparticle-based solution to actually clean up oil spills. And so this work kind of combined chemical engineering, but also computer science because there was a lot of modeling involved for the methane capture aspect and also designing these photocatalyst systems. And so I would say, if you can engage in lab research or just even cold emailing local professors at your university, I would say definitely it was such a transformative experience. And I really was able to work with PhD students, professors, and just, being able to contribute to some of these amazing projects was such an important experience.
And Hamza, obviously your field is very different. So could you talk about any like projects, maybe if not research, that you combined like the hard sciences with technology with?
Yeah, so the main thing that comes to mind is a project I did for a program called NASA Hunch, where basically, and it's a really good program. It's in hundreds of schools throughout the nation to where, and I'm pretty sure it's open to middle schoolers and high schoolers alike. So we were given a task where it was like making an auger slash brick extruder where we were going to take lunar regolith and plastic, shredded plastic, and heat it up to where we could make bricks to where astronauts could use it on the moon to make whatever they want to construct on there. And with a project like that, there's obviously the hard part of figuring out how you're going to actually do the design. Like, how do you make an auger in general? Because the idea is that you have to research the conditions on the moon, research how lunar regolith works, the mixture. So combining science and actual technology requires you to do just an immense amount of planning and immense amount of research before you could actually get real plans and real and real like test subjects like actually developed and designed. So we spent like 3 4 months purely on developing on Inventor, writing research reports, talking to like talking to the engineers we're working with, and seeing what would be like an actual viable option. And then we started with the actual constructing and going through the design reviews and the preliminary and final design reviews to where we'd have a final design that could be possibly used on a rover.
And that project you were talking about, was that just something like was that the motive for like everybody, or was that something that you guys wanted to do yourselves at your school or your group?
So you're given like 8 to 9 different possible designs you could do every single year, and it's constantly changing. So based on the 8 to 9 different designs, everyone chooses and splits off into either groups of three, groups of four, or however many people they want. And you compete and you research and design up until the first preliminary step, which is the preliminary design review. And then there you'll go to a local space center or you'll fly out to a local space center and you'll basically meet with NASA engineers and showcase your design and they'll review it and they'll critique it and they'll be true about it. Like they won't like hide anything. If there's something bad, they'll tell you it's bad and they'll tell you to change it. And I think the experience is way more like realistic of what you're going to expect because realistically, it's extremely hard to get something on the moon. And for high schoolers or kids age like 13 to 18 to design that, it's not an easy task. So the engineers are going to be like true, and they're going to treat you like how they would any other like any one of their peers. So choosing a project that I know my year there was obviously the auger shooter. Then you can also make like mini habitat tables where you could test like different type like crickets or different insects on the moon. There's also work tables to where it'd have to be foldable or collapsible to where astronauts could like put hundreds of pounds of stuff and still function fine. There's a mirror which would work with us, and it would basically heat up the auger shooter using the sun because there's no atmosphere on the moon, so it's much easier to heat stuff up. And yeah, there's just a bunch of different projects every single year, and they're constantly changing. So you're bound to find something that you're like passionate about or you're interested in.
Okay, awesome. So, that was obviously a very big project that you worked on, but could you talk about any other projects maybe that you apply like scientific principles to along with technology, or like how they would go hand in hand with the recent project you worked on?
I recently did research under an under professor at UHCL, Mr. David Garrison, and we were working on computational physics, which we were working more on the research side to where he wanted to develop, and he's been working on this for 2 decades, and I played a very small hand in it, obviously. But he's been working on a model using a using a toolkit called the Einstein toolkit, and he basically wants to construct a model of the universe starting back from whenever it first started, and using like stuff that we know and stuff that we can measure in real life, and applying those like real life measurements to where we could simulate it and see what the universe would expand and change centuries from now, thousands of years, or millennia from now. So that I think we used way more way more hard science and had to figure out a lot of the different principles and a lot of the different physics or yeah the physics behind the universe and see how we would apply it and measure what we could.
Okay, and that seems like really complicated, honestly. Like obviously you were working with a professor and you're a high school student, but What would you say was like, what was the coolest thing that you learned there? Or like, what were you actually working on as a high school student there?
Uh, I played a very small part because high school student, I don't understand the universe like that. I'm not going to. Not. I don't think that's something I want to get into mainly. But the main thing I played a hand in was so with the toolkit that we're using every year it goes through updates and obviously as science is changing and we learn more about it, it goes through updates and it gets updated to where it's more accurate and a more realistic representation. And his model with every single update is it either gets broken or gets changed and it doesn't work as intended. So I was trying to figure out the differences between what changed from previous versions to this version and figure out how we can update the parameters that we've set to where it matches with what they've now figured out or what they've seen is not realistic from before. So I was trying to figure out like the small little and it's hard to do when you're looking at thousands of lines of code, but trying to figure out what different parameters it change and how it affects simulations that we don't know that we don't know if they're true or not. So I was mostly just focusing on revisions and figuring out what the changes were.
Okay, awesome. And Antonia, what about you? Could you like describe a recent project maybe where you've worked with science and technology hand in hand?
Yeah, for sure. I'd say the most significant project that I've worked on, especially in high school, was the development of my app that I created, Detickt It. And it's currently on the Apple App Store. And this was actually my Congressional App Challenge submission. And basically, about 3 years ago now, I was diagnosed with two rare systematic tick-borne infections. And I live in Connecticut, so this isn't uncommon, but it took me a while, and also doctors a while, to actually figure out what was going on because one of the issues is because they're so endemic to the area, the symptoms can mirror other diseases. And so there was a lot of misdiagnosis, and this is very common with tick-borne diseases. And so I was on, this dose of antibiotics and treatment to get over one of the rarest infections for tick-borne diseases. And I normally sail over the summer, and so that summer I actually couldn't competitively sail because of sun exposure, and just with antibiotics it didn't work out. And so I decided I always liked machine learning, was interested in it, also computer science. And so I decided to take kind of an application-based course on machine learning and convolutional neural networks, and basically how to apply AI to some of these pressing problems. And so I took the course, and it was mostly geared to bioinformatics and also figuring out, gene sequencing and figuring out basically genomic ways to find cancer and other diagnosis and diagnostic applications of AI. And throughout the process, I really wanted, you look at literature sometimes, and I was looking at tick-borne disease research, and I just noticed a huge gap in the literature. And no one had really at that point applied machine learning to the issue, or they had, and they had been unsuccessful, or there had just been pitfalls. And so I decided that summer to basically create a convolutional neural network that is capable of identifying tick species. And the thought behind that is that ticks are interesting, and so based on the exact geographic location of the tick and also the species, their pathogens can vary greatly. And so if you actually know the species of tick and also where the tick was found, you can actually, by utilizing a health database such as the CDC, you can basically create what is known as like a risk heuristic. And so that's basically how this app started. And I went to a lot of science competitions and conferences to kind of learn more about how I can present my research. And I would say if you're a high school student, definitely try, to submit your research to some of these competitions, your local science fairs, because it really can propel your research forward. And for me, it was very pivotal because they actually exposed a lot of issues with my code and also accessibility, because at that point it was just a convolutional neural network. It wasn't usable. And so it's gotten to the point where now my app has 3,000 downloads on the Apple App Store, and it's capable of identifying the 10 most disease-causing species in North and South America with 97% accuracy, which is also the highest reported in tick-borne disease literature. So that has definitely been the most significant project that I worked on.
Okay, and so those are both like really big, obvious accomplishments in your own respective fields. So I have one last question for you guys. Briefly, what advice would you give like high schoolers or middle schoolers who would just be interested in getting to know how science and technology could work together, and how could they get into the field? And Antonia, you can take this one first.
I would say if you have the resources available, cold call emails at your local university. I live in Connecticut, so I happen to be closer to Yale University, but you can really email and reach out to most are going to say no, but you know what? That one person who might say yes, take them up on the offer. I would also say for people who want to kids going into research, don't be afraid to ask for help, because really science is about collaboration. And I mean, Hamza touched on this. You might have more of like an insignificant role in lab research. That's just normal. But that little piece of, help and assisting, even if you think it's the smallest bit, it actually is very influential and can totally help the project. So just try to get involved, and yeah.
Uh, Not to just copy exactly what she said, but cold calling and cold emailing is by far like the best thing you can do. I can't stress it enough. Like professors, students, even like if your high school has an alumni database, which I know plenty do, and like if your parents went to college and they have their own alumni directories, so reaching out to whoever you can, friends of friends, professors, there's an infinite amount of connections you can possibly find, and reaching out to them and you saying, hey, explain the situation, say what you're passionate about, and I guarantee you there has to be at least one person in the hundreds of people that may be around you that could help you. And not only that, but there's plenty of like online programs as well that you can do that you don't need to rely on someone for. So sure, relying on someone's always good, but let's say that isn't an option for you, then you can always, there's plenty of online different programs. Like I know Microsoft has their own, Google has their own program programming pro- programming programs where they teach you and you do research and you participate in competitions where you don't have to fly out. It's no cost to you. There's infinite resources out there, and it's just up to you to being proactive and figuring out what's near you, what's available, and what you qualify for and what you're passionate about.
I totally agree with Hamza. I think even YouTube as a resource, you can learn so much. I mean, the amount of resources, and now also with AI, I mean, even ChatGPT, you can learn so much, and you really should take advantage of that.
Okay, awesome. Thank you both for your time today. I think you both have really like amazing experiences, honestly. So it was really great to hear from both of you, and both from your respective fields. So thank you for your time.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
And
It's great.
And with that, we'll wrap up this week's episode, and be sure to catch us next week for another episode. Thank you, Suhaani, for hosting, and thank you to our panelists.
Thanks so much.